The day of Arba'in is remembered by millions of people around the world. There are large marches in cities everywhere to symbolize the eternal nature of Imam Hussein's struggle. In Iraq, many of our brothers and sisters from all walks of life and from all corners of the world are completing the walk from Najaf to Karbala in commemoration of this day. Tonight, our hearts are with them in Karbala. May Allah give us the opportunity to complete this blessed pilgrimage ourselves one day, inshallah. Please recite Allah's salawat. We will begin our program tonight with the recitation of the Holy Quran. I would like to invite Mustafa Hassan to please recite Surah Bayyinah. Please recite Allah's salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة رسول من الله يتلو صحفا مطهرة فيها كتب قيمة وما تفرق الذين أوتوا الكتاب إلا من بعد ما جاءتهم البينة وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة ذلك دين القيمة إن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين في نار جهنم خالدين فيها أولئك هم شر البرية إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أولئك هم خير البرية جزاؤهم عند ربهم جنات عدن تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه ذلك لمن خشي ربه In the name of Allah, the kind, the merciful. Those who reject among the people of the book and among the polytheists were not going to depart from their ways until there should come to them clear evidence. And a messenger from Allah rehearsing scriptures kept you pure and holy, wherein are laws right and straight. Nor did the people of the book make schisms until after there came to them clear evidence. And they have been commanded to more than this, to worship Allah, offering Him sincere devotion, being true in faith, to establish regular prayer, and to practice regular charity, and that is the religion right and straight. Those who reject among the people of the book and among the polytheists will be in hellfire to dwell therein. They are the worst of creatures. Those who have faith and do righteous deeds, they are the best of creatures. Their reward is with Allah, gardens of eternity beneath which rivers flow. They will dwell there forever. Allah will be pleased for them, and they with Him. All this for such as fear their Lord and cherisher.
Thank you, Mustafa, for that very beautiful recitation. Now we will have a recitation of poetry by Muhammad Zahid.
Salawat.
حسين الغريب الغريب الحسين حسين الشهيد 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 الحسين حسين الغريب الغريب الحسين حسين الشهيد الشهيد الحسين. You're the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad Mustafa, the son of Imam Ali and Lady Fatima, the purest of souls with utmost purity. Yet thousands of so-called Muslims showed no loyalty. They saw you enter the holy cloak by the will of Allah, yet shroudless they left you in the plains of Karbala. You're the teacher of sacrifice and of charity. You even fed the horses of your enemies. From darkness into light you set her free. For surely he entered heaven with your mother's handkerchief. But when you pleaded for mighty Asghar, who was just thirsty, an arrow is what they fed to your infant baby. No Qasim, no An, no Muhammad, no Abbas, no Akbar, no Asghar, you lost them all so fast. Oh Allah, please accept this humble sacrifice. These were the words of our Imam when Asr time arrived. Oh Allah, what has he lost, he who loses you? But oh Allah, what can he lose, he who finds you? You're the savior of Islam and our faith you did revive. Today we call Ya Mahdi, without him we are deprived. For surely he grieves over tortured beloved, and when we lament the trials faced by al-Masayib. Ya Mahdi, tonight we vow and grieve with you. In the light of al-Hussein, together we'll fight for truth. Hussein al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Hussein. Hussein al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed, al-Hussein. Hussein al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Hussein. Hussein al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed, al-Hussein. Salawat.
Thank you, Muhammad, for that very deep recitation. We will now be moving towards the lecture portion of our program, so please with a loud salawat welcome Hujjatul Islam Sayyid Sulayman Hassan. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Surah Al-Fatiha. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you know, today was the day of Arba'een, a very important day in the Islamic calendar. It doesn't commemorate an event that took place on this day. Most of the other observances and commemorations that we have in Islam, they pertain to something that took place on the day of the observance. So for example, if we remember the 18th of Dhul Hijjah, that is because the public proclamation of the imamat and the wilayat of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It took place on that very day. So Eidul Ghadir, or the day of Ghadir, it commemorates an event that took place in a place called Ghadir Khum, and on the day of the 18th of Dhul Hijjah. That is when it took place, and that is when we commemorate it every year. Similarly, when we celebrate the birth of any one of the Ma'sumin, or we commemorate the death or martyrdom of any one of the Ma'sumin, or we remember one of the other important occasions in Islam, whether it be Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha or Laylatul Qadr, it is because of something that took place on that day. But the one exception is this day of Arba'een. It doesn't commemorate something that took place on that day. It commemorates something that took place 40 days before the day of Arba'een and the day of that observance. And there is a very beautiful wisdom and a benefit in this remembrance of Arba'een. There is no comparison, but in some ways we can say that it is even more important for our lives than the remembrance of Ashura. And again, there is no comparison. We cannot say that Arba'een is more important or less important, but we can say that in some ways it is more important, because there is a relevance and a power and a continuing effect to this remembrance of Arba'een that is not found in any of the other times when we remember the events of Karbala and the sacrifice of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam Hassan ibn Ali alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Sallu ala Muhammad. So in some ways, there is a unique and an unparalleled importance to this observance, which is not found even on the day of Ashura or in any other time. To understand that, we should know that to do ziyarah of Imam Hussein, to remember Imam Hussein, is something that is part of our Muslim practice, not just on the day of Ashura, not just in the month of Muharram, not just in the sad occasions, but even on the happy occasions, even on the day of Eid, on any occasion that is important for Islam. In many cases, you will find a ziyara makhsusa, a special ziyara which was taught or recited by the imams for that day of the Islamic calendar. Any special day in our Islamic calendar. That is on the sad occasions, like the day of Ashura, or on the happy occasions, like the days of Eid. But there are two times when we don't just recite the ziyarah of Imam Hussein, but all of our attention is devoted to Imam Hussein. And those are the day of Ashura and the day of Arba'een. In the other occasions, we remember Imam Hussein, but there is also another significance for the event. So Eid al-Fitr is the Eid, the celebration which comes after the month of fasting, after the month of Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This celebration which comes after the month of fasting. And during Eid al-Fitr, we remember Imam Hussein. Eid al-Adha is a remembrance of the sacrifice of Prophet Ibrahim, and it is the culmination of the rituals and the worship of Hajj. And on that day, we remember Imam Hussein, as we remember him at other times in our Islamic year. But the day of Ashura is a day of remembrance of Imam Hussein, not alongside another observance, but as the main remembrance in that day. And the day of Arba'een is also a day of remembrance. Now, between the two, there is a difference. And before I explain the difference, I want to understand why there should be a difference in the way we remember or the way we observe. Why is there a need for two different kinds of observance? Some of you may be familiar that there is a question or sometimes an objection which is made about the mourning and the tears and the grief that the lovers of Ahlul Bayt express on the day of Ashura, sometimes by some Muslims. They say that if you believe that the martyrs are alive and that they are rewarded by God, and in fact they are more alive than people in this world, because they are ahya inda rabbihim yurzaqun, they are alive with their Lord, in the presence of their Lord. We have so many curtains and so many veils and so many spiritual realities that are shielded from our eyes because we are not alive enough to see the spiritual reality of existence. But the martyrs, they are with their Lord. They receive their rizq directly from their Lord, and they have the presence of Allah, and their spiritual eyes, their insight is open to the true reality of existence. The difference is comparable to when we first wake up and we're still kind of groggy and we haven't yet washed our face and brushed our teeth, and somebody says something to us and we half understand it and we don't understand it. We are awake, but not fully awake. And then maybe after we've done our morning routine or our exercise or breakfast or whatever it is, 20 minutes later, half an hour later, now we're fully awake. And we say, what was it that you were talking about when I first woke up? I don't think I understood. If I said something, maybe it doesn't count because I was just speaking out of sleepiness. So even if we are fully awake, we're still groggy because we don't understand so many things that are real and true. Martyrs are more alive. So if we believe that martyrs have such a high rank and are so alive, then why would you mourn and grieve over martyrdom? It is something that you should celebrate. It is something that you should mark with happiness, because this is the time that Imam Hussein, Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam, and the martyrs who gave their lives with him, they reached the highest spiritual rank. If I celebrate graduation or a promotion or a success or a triumph in life, then this is the greatest success and the greatest triumph that anyone has ever experienced in life. Why would you shed tears and mourn rather than celebrate? You may be familiar with that question. And the answer to that is not a difficult answer. There is a happiness and a gratitude and a praise for Allah that comes at a time of sacrifice and a time of martyrdom. And that is why, according to narrations, as the day of Ashura progressed, Imam Hussein's face, although superficially, was filled with more and more wounds and more grief and more fatigue, also had a radiance that was not visible at any other time. And that is reflected in the chronicler and the historian of the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad, Humayd ibn Muslim. He wasn't a follower of Imam Hussein, for us to say that he was psychologically influenced because Imam Hussein was his Imam and his leader. He was in the army and he was the historian, the chronicler for Umar ibn Sa'ad. A report that he was writing, it was paid for, and it was going to be submitted to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, and then it was going to be forwarded to Yazid. And as you know, the history is always going to reflect the interests of the person who is paying for it. But Humayd ibn Muslim, what does he say when he sees Imam Hussein in the afternoon of Ashura? Not at the beginning of the battle. He says that I have never seen a person who is so alone, who has suffered so much, who is so wounded, who is thirsty, yet has the radiance of the sun and all of the heavenly bodies in his person, so that you wouldn't think that you are viewing a human being coming to the battlefield, but it looks like it is a spiritual being. That is the inner gratitude Imam Hussein has, that in spite of the hardship, Allah has chosen him for the most important and the highest spiritual task that a human being can perform. But there is also a material and a physical aspect, which is part of that triumph. And that material aspect is tragedy. And as human beings, we should have gratitude to Allah, even in times of suffering. But we should not ignore the human aspect and the tragedy. Both of them are simultaneously true. And the only way to truly have gratitude for the value of sacrifice is if you have an understanding of the depth of the tragedy. Let's say, for example, that somebody is going through a very hard time in their life, a friend of mine, and I want to help them deal with that very hard time. Maybe they lost a loved one in their family. Sometimes we want to help them, and so we say something like, well, everyone's going to die. Or they had a long and unproductive life. You know, they were sick, and they were in pain, and they were suffering, and now they're in a better place. And sometimes those words that we might be thinking will provide consolation, they don't actually help, they actually make the grief deeper. The only way that you can be consoled or you can give consolation to somebody at a time of great suffering is to honor and to recognize the reality of that grief and that loss. And only through the recognition of that loss can you then begin to heal and to be consoled. But if I try to forget the loss, and I say, let me take your mind off your suffering, let's go watch a movie. Am I going to make it better? Am I going to provide healing? I might provide distraction, but that's not going to be consolation, it's not going to be healing. I have to recognize and honor the reality of that person's suffering and their loss, and when I do that, then I can begin to help them to develop a spiritual view and a contentment with whatever Allah has decreed. So the only way to honor the sacrifice of Imam Hussein is to first recognize the reality of the loss, the depth of the tragedy. The tragedy of Karbala is not that Imam Hussein was thirsty for 3 days. So that, for example, if I find out it wasn't 3 days, it was 2.5 days, or it was 2 days, the tragedy would be less. The tragedy of Karbala was not how many wounds were inflicted on the body of Imam Hussein. So that if I find out it wasn't 70 wounds, it was 50 wounds, the tragedy would be reduced. The tragedy of Karbala was not how hot the battlefield was. For me to say that if it wasn't in the month of August and it was in the month of October and it wasn't 100 degrees, it was 80 degrees, then there is a 20% reduction in the tragedy or the suffering. The tragedy of Karbala is so great because it is a reflection not just of what Ahlul Bayt suffered, but what humanity lost. When the one who was the divinely appointed infallible guide, who could solve my individual questions and spiritual needs and my intellectual needs, and all of the needs of every individual believer and every individual human being and all of society, was taken away from humanity and not able to provide his guidance for the upliftment and the betterment of human society. Every crime that was committed, every injustice that humanity suffered, every harm, every difficulty, every tragedy is connected to the loss of Ahlul Bayt and their leadership and their guidance in the position of leadership for the Muslim Ummah. The tragedy is not just what hardship Imam Hussein suffered, or Sayyida Zainab suffered, or the martyrs or the survivors of Karbala suffered. But it is a tragedy for all of humanity. It is a tragedy for all of creation. And the only way to show my gratitude to Allah for His decree, for giving me the opportunity to know about Karbala, and for me to benefit from Karbala, is to first recognize the depth of that tragedy and that suffering. So now let us come back to these two occasions which are dedicated to Imam Hussein. One is Ashura. Ashura is the time for me to recognize the depth of the tragedy and to remember what took place. So it's not the history that we are recounting, but it is the story of Karbala that we are reliving and we are participating in. And this is why our Imams taught us that when the day of Ashura comes, then don't cry as if you are remembering a tragedy, but shed tears as if you are present and you are living in that tragedy. Because on a spiritual level, that battle of Karbala is not a memory, but it is a present reality. And it is a battle that is still continuing. So the day of Ashura is for us to understand what happened. What was the tragedy that befell Ahlul Bayt, and befell all of the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, and befell all of creation because of the suffering of Ahlul Bayt. To feel and to participate and to be present in the depth of that tragedy and that grief. That is what is unique about the remembrance of Ashura. But then there is another aspect of the same battle of Karbala. There is another battle of Imam Hussein in which he was not massacred, he was not martyred, but he was victorious. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And that is also the battle of Karbala. The battle of Karbala, in which Imam Hussein was martyred, is the historical reality of Karbala. And the battle of Karbala, in which Imam Hussein won against his enemy, is the spiritual reality of the battle of Karbala. One is not more real than the other. They are just two different aspects to that battle. And to understand that, there is a very beautiful incident from the life of Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. And in reality, this hadith of Imam Ali is a commentary of the Quran. Sometimes people ask this question, that why does the Quran judge Banu Israel, the Israelites, for crimes that they did not commit? For example, the Quran says, why do you kill the prophets of God unjustly? Now, which of the Israelites of the time of the Prophet had even met a prophet before Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wa alih? None of them had even met a prophet, let alone fought a prophet, let alone killed a prophet. The previous prophet was Prophet Isa alayhi salam, and he was from 600 years before. They had never even seen Prophet Isa. They had never opposed him, and they certainly had not caused him any bodily harm. And the previous prophets that the Quran is speaking of, these were hundreds of years before Prophet Isa, thousands of years before Prophet Muhammad. But the Quran says that the people who were contemporaries of the Prophet are responsible. And this is a principle of the Quran explained by our eighth Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salatu wassalam. That on a physical level, you are limited to your time and your space. But on a spiritual level, you are responsible for and you get the credit for your intentions. So if somebody did a bad thing and I am happy at that evil deed, I identify with that evil deed. Physically, I did not live in World War II and I didn't commit the crimes of the Nazis or I didn't commit the crimes of colonialism. But if I take pride in the colonial history of my country, and I have a kind of nostalgia and admiration for those who committed evil deeds, then I share in their evil deeds, even if I didn't participate physically and I was not even alive at that time. And if there was somebody who did a good thing, and I admire them, and I wish that I were there to share in that good deed with them, even though I wasn't alive and I wasn't present, Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam says that you are spiritually present you have the reward of the good deed, and you have the punishment of the bad deed that you identify with. Because the spirit is not limited by this physical world. The physical body is only a vehicle, it's a cage for our soul, so long as we are in this world. But the real life of the soul is based on our loyalty, our love, and our intention. And so if the Israelites in the time of Prophet Muhammad had an admiration for their ancestors who fought against the prophets, and the way you can show that they had an admiration and an identification with them is that they opposed and they fought against the prophet of their time, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alih. Then in the logic of the Quran, they not only have the punishment, but they were the murderers of those prophets, because that is where their soul is. And if somebody says that I identify with Prophet Musa, I identify with Prophet Isa, I admire them and I follow their path, you might never have met them, but you are with them. This Quranic principle explained by our 8th Imam was illustrated in the life of our first Imam, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In the battle of Jamal. A man came to Imam Ali after the battle of Jamal, when the Imam had achieved victory. He says that, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, if only my brother were here. He would have loved to be part of this victory and to see that you have defeated your enemies. And Imam Ali says that, does he wish he were here? And that person said that yes, he would have wanted to be here. Circumstances did not permit him to be here. What does Imam Ali say? He doesn't say that then he has the reward. He doesn't say that that person has the reward. He says, فَإِنَّهُ قَدْ شَهِدَنَا. He was here. Physically, that person was not in the battle of Jamal. But the Imam says he was here. Because what counts is not the presence of the body, but rather the presence of the soul. And then the Imam says one step further. Present in this battle and in this victory, there are many people who are not yet born. Their parents and their grandparents are not yet born. When time will come, then in the centuries and in the generations to come, they will be born and their hearts will be with Ahlul Bayt. They are here with us on the battle of Jamal. They're not yet born, but the Imam says they are there. So this is the other part of the battle of Karbala. When millions of people say, Ya laytana kunna ma'akum fanafuza ma'akum fawzan azima, that, oh Imam Hussein, our heart is with you. We are part of your mission, your movement, your struggle, your sacrifice, your values. Our practice is deficient because we are filled with sin and shortcomings. But our heart, our intention, our qibla, our direction is towards you. Then according to the logic of the Quran, according to the logic of our 8th Imam, according to the logic of our first Imam after the battle of Jamal, all of those people whose intentions are with Imam Hussein, they were there. They are part of the battle of Karbala. The physical battle of Karbala ended in the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and his companions, and the captivity of the family and the loved ones of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alih. But the battle of Karbala is taking place on the spiritual level as well, not just on the physical level. And that battle that is taking place on the spiritual level, it is one in which Imam Hussein is not with 72 against 30,000. But Imam Hussein has millions of people throughout the generations and in this time who say labbaik, to the call of Ahlul Bayt, who say labbaik to the call of Imam Hussein, who say labbaik to the call of Imam Mahdi, meaning they are answering and they are obeying and they are following the call of Ahlul Bayt towards becoming just and establishing justice. And so on Ashura we remember the depth of the tragedy, because that is what humanity lost and all of creation lost. When the Imam of the time is oppressed and martyred. Arba'een is when we remember, also through grief and also through tears, that the battle continues. And it is one that is leading towards the triumph of Imam Hussein. It is one that is leading to the eradication of oppression and injustice and evil. Even though it seems that the Yazids of today are no less powerful than the Yazids of yesterday, the very inspiration and love and tears that people have from the story and from the movement of Karbala, they are the signs that it is Imam Hussein who is victorious. So, Ashura is the commemoration of the physical battle of Karbala, and Arba'een is the commemoration of the continuation of the battle of Karbala. It is a remembrance of the spiritual battle of Karbala. And this is not a remembrance of something that took place on this day. It remembers something that took place 40 days ago on the day of Ashura, because that spiritual battle builds upon that physical battle that Imam Hussein alayhi salam fought on the plains of Karbala. We still remember it through tragedy, because the battle has not yet been completed. In our time, there are new Yazids. There are many sources of evil. But anybody who is hungry, who is homeless, who is unjustly a captive, who is oppressed, who is suffering because of human injustice, this is part of the movement that Ahlul Bayt and Imam Hussein had set out to eradicate. And anyone who is doing good, anyone who is trying to make the world a healthier and a more wholesome and a better place, is on the side of Ahlul Bayt, even if they don't yet realize it. They might not have full knowledge, but whatever good we do is on the side of the movement of Ahlul Bayt. And whatever evil we do or we see, that is part of the side of Yazid. Because that battle has not been won, because tragedy still exists, because evil still exists, because injustice is still present everywhere in the world, we still remember Karbala through tears. But in Arba'een, it is not a remembrance only of what happened. It is a remembrance of the continuation of that struggle. It is a commemoration of the millions of our fellow human beings who have joined the caravan of Karbala. And it is our commitment also to join the caravan of Karbala. And because this was the day of Arba'een, I want to mention two ahadith. One hadith from our 11th Imam, Imam Hassan ibn Ali al-Askari alayhi as-salatu was-salam. And one hadith from our fourth Imam, Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn Zayn al-Abidin alayhi as-salatu was-salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And these are a hadith that many of you may have heard before, but for myself, for all of us, they are a very important reminder and a necessary reminder. In fact, until we have internalized and we have practiced the message, we should never say that I've heard it before. We need to keep reminding ourselves and keep hearing it until we have internalized and we have begun to practice. And it has become part of our soul and our body and our existence. The hadith of our 11th Imam talks about the external environment that we need as a believer to preserve our faith. Let's say that you feel that you are physically unclean. Depending on how unclean you feel, you may need to spend more time cleaning yourself. Sometimes we go to a restaurant to get a bite to eat, and we're happy just to wash our hands. Or maybe we put some hand sanitizer on and we feel like we've disinfected ourselves, and then we're happy to eat our meal. But if you've come to a place where you feel filthy, maybe, for example, you went to a park and you stepped in something that was unclean, and there was a bird, and that bird, it had droppings and it came near you, or you feel like you have been contaminated through some sickness, through some najasa, through some impurity. That's a greater sense that I'm not clean. So are you just going to go and say, well, my hand is filthy, let me just wash it for 1 second, rinse it, or put a drop of hand sanitizer? You may feel the need to change your clothes, to take a shower. Sometimes if we are feeling really dirty, really contaminated, when we take a shower, we may soap ourselves once, twice, more than twice, until we feel like we have expelled the filth from our body. And then when we put our clothes in the washer, we're not just going to wash them once, but there's an extra rinse and a sanitized cycle, and extra soap, because we want to feel clean. Well, the reality is that when we go out in the earth and we live our daily lives, we are going through many forms of contamination. When you go in an environment where the economy and society and politics and everything is to serve the self and not to serve God, to serve the lowest desires of our body and our passions and our animal nature, then just by being present in that society, I am becoming contaminated. I feel like I am dirty if somebody coughs on me. If I'm out and somebody's dog rubs against me and now I feel like there is a physical najasa, uncleanliness on my pants. If there is a germ or something that I feel like I have come into contact with. But that is not as dangerous or as damaging as the spiritual contamination of being part of a society, a media culture, a political and a professional culture that is entirely materialistic and devoted just to pleasure and power and wealth and fun. And that's the world that we live in. Now, Islam has not taught us to become monks, and Islam has not taught us to retreat from that world. What Islam has taught us is that when you come home, cleanse yourself. And when you are out and about, protect yourself. Remember in the early days of the pandemic, people would wear a mask, and then they would have a face mask, a cover, and then they would bring their groceries in, and they would change their clothes outside of the door, and they would wash and disinfect their groceries before they brought them in. Maybe some of those precautions weren't necessary, but that exact philosophy is exactly what we need for our spiritual life. It might not be necessary for your physical health. When you go out, make sure you have a spiritual mask. When you come home, make sure you have a routine for your spiritual purification. This is what the hadith of Imam Hassan Askari alayhi salam is telling us. وَآلِ مُحَمَّدْ وَعَجِّلْ فَرَجَهُمْ. Feel like you are in need of a cleanse. Because only if you feel like a need is there, will you use it and will you appreciate its benefit. Our 11th Imam gives us 5 instructions. He says, Alamatul mu'mini khams. The signs of a believer are 5. These are 5 signs for our external environment, and the importance of these cleansers and these protections for our external environment is just like that mask, just like that disinfectant, just like that shower that we take when we are contaminated with a physical impurity. They remind us that although we are living in this world, we are not living for this world. We are in this world, but we are not of this world. Our goal and our reality is much more sublime. So what does our 11th Imam say? He said there are 5 signs of a believer. Salatu ihda wa khamseen. Praying 51 raka'at a day. Now, many of us, we have a hard time with our wajib prayers. So, how can we say that we have 51 raka'at? This is not to say that a believer must always have 51 raka'at. But first of all, this should be my ideal. The Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu dhkurullaha dhikran kathira. O believers, remember Allah a frequent remembrance. And so the first part of this 51 rak'ah goal is for me to try to remember Allah frequently. Sometimes we have a busy life, we have our own personality, but we can start to increase the frequency and the reality of our dhikr even if we are busy. The greatest example is, of course, to recite tasbih of Fatimatu Zahra salamullahi alayha after every prayer. Sallu ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil farajahum. So when we do tasbih after every prayer, according to a hadith, you are counted among the people who do frequent dhikr. The reminding of nawafil is on the same goal, which is that we move beyond our wajibat. Too many of us, we have a low baseline for our good deeds. I know many people that after they do their wajib prayers, they feel like they've done something. I've fulfilled my obligation to Allah. After they fast, they feel like they have done something. And they're not going to think about fasting again until Ramadan of the next year. When they give their khums, they feel, especially if I've had a good year and I had a large amount of savings, and I have to write a big check, then I feel like, oh, I've been generous. I feel like it's come out of my pocket. Although khums is not from my pocket, I'm just repaying a debt. When I pray, I'm paying my debt to God. How many marriages have been destroyed? And how many relationships between parents and children have been destroyed? Because one partner says, or one person says, that I provide for my family, I work hard all day. Doesn't that show that I love them? Well, if you provide for your family, that is your obligation as a parent, as a head of household. That is not a favor that you are doing. Yes, it is the obligation of your children to be grateful. But it is also your obligation to provide for them. So rather than feel like I have accomplished something, feel grateful and humble that you have been given the ability to provide for your family. And then express your love and express your affection for your spouse and for your children in ways other than just saying, well, I put a roof over their head and I provide food on the table and clothes that are in their closet, and that's sign of my love and affection, and that's sufficient. So Islam wants us to move beyond what is required and to seek to do what is not required, because that is the beauty and the heart of a relationship. Just like that's important in our human relationships, it's important in our relationship with Allah. So salatu ihda wa khamseen, praying nawafil and fara'id, meaning praying our non-wajib prayers and our wajib prayers is not a number, it is a philosophy. It is not a quantity of prayer, but it is a philosophy of life. That I don't just want to do the minimum. I'm not just going to pay my debt and say that I am generous. But rather, I am going to pay my debt so I feel like I know what I need to do, and then I want to build upon that to come closer to God. And if we have that philosophy, then it becomes easier and easier for us to do more in terms of quantity as well. Doing nafilah and recommended prayers for forgiveness for our parents, for our fellow believers, all of those things will become easier. So Imam, our 11th Imam says first, Salatu ihda wa khamsin. Pray beyond your wajib prayers. It's a number, but more importantly, it's a philosophy of life. Don't do the bare minimum and don't become arrogant and complacent. But be humble, be grateful, and do what is above and beyond the call of duty, because that is how you give beauty to your human relationships, and that is how you give beauty to your relationship with Allah. The second thing the Imam mentions is وَزِيَارَةٌ أَرْبَعِينَ. Honor this ziyarah of Arba'een. If you're able to go to Karbala, go to Karbala. If you're not able to go, then remember those who have gone in your prayers. Protect them, pray for them, help them, and do ziyarah of Imam Hussein from wherever you are. Your heart should be with Imam Hussein on the day of Arba'een. Remember that Karbala was not just a tragedy that took place on Ashura. It is an ongoing struggle, a caravan of humanity serving the cause of God, moving beyond the ego and the self to serve others with sincerity, with humility, with a sense of sacrifice. So Ziyaratul Arba'een is the second. Then the third category, the third quality is وَالتَّقَدُّمْ فِي الْيَمِينِ. Wear a ring on the right hand. This was the practice of our Prophet and our Imams, and it is a symbol of our loyalty to them. So some of us, we can wear a ring all the time. Many of us, for work reasons, for health reasons, for whatever reason, we're not able to wear a ring all the time. Then at least keep a ring and wear it when you do dua. Wear it when you do salat at times of prayer. Keep takhattum bil yameen as a reminder and a symbol of your loyalty and your affiliation to Ahlul Bayt. Then the fourth thing mentioned by our 11th Imam is وَتَعْفِيرُ الْجَبِينِ, to make your forehead dusty. This is also part of the practice of the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, because when we go into prostration in our prayer, it is a symbol of our mortality. We were created from these material elements, and our body will be returned and it will disintegrate back into the earth. The soul will survive, but the body, it came from the earth and it will go back to the earth. And so we should never become arrogant. You know how sometimes as we go through life, we think that we have left our family behind. I'm sophisticated, and they still have the simple-minded pleasures of when we were in a small town or when we were children. I am smarter, I am more educated, I am more influential, I am wealthier, I am more powerful, I am superior, or in whatever way I feel like I have left behind my family. Sometimes people even leave behind their spouse, their near ones, their parents. Ta'firul Jabin is an external symbol to remind us that we are only going to be able to be worthy of the name of humanity if we are humble. No matter how many degrees you may have, no matter how much wealth you may have, no matter how much progress and success you may have professionally, your greatest honor is to serve, not to be served. And that is why the greatest of humanity, who is not just our Prophet, but a mercy to all of humanity. When we honor him, we say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Our Prophet is the servant and the messenger of God. Servant comes first. Why? Because humility is the greatest honor. When you come to the masjid, you leave behind your professional success. And it is your honor to help clean, to help prepare, to help in the most humble manner to arrange these gatherings of worship and remembrance for Ahlul Bayt. So humility. And then fifth and finally the Imam says, وَالْجَهْرُ بِبِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ. The attribute of a believer externally is to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim out loud, because this was the practice of Imam Ali, and it is a reminder that the heart of the Quran is our connection with Allah, who is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most loving, the most merciful. No matter what we might experience in life, never lose hope in the mercy and the kindness and the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In every prayer, say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim out loud. So 5 attributes: praying your wajib and your recommended prayers, the ziyarat of Imam Hussein on this day of Arba'een, wearing a ring on your right hand, putting your forehead on the dust, so there is a mark of humility that inshallah will come into our heart and we never become arrogant, and to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim out loud. The other hadith is from our 4th Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin, and because Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Because our 4th Imam is the heir of Karbala, he was the ambassador of Karbala, he is the one who took the flag of Karbala after and gave us this dhikr today. I will very briefly just mention the 5 attributes which he mentions. These are not external, but these are internal. These pertain to the heart. 4th Imam says, Alamatul mu'mini khams. The signs of a believer are 5. Al-wara' inda al-khalwa, or al-wara'u fil khalwa. To have piety when we are alone. Most of us, we pray well when we are with people. But then when we are alone, we're distracted. A believer is somebody who is most conscious that they are in the presence of God when they are alone, because that is when we are most intimate and most near the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we are alone with our Creator, that is a time of greater intimacy, not a time when I forget and then I might say something or think something or do something that I would not do in the presence of another person. The sign of a believer is that we have fear of God when we are alone, and not just when we are with others. وَالصَّدَقَةُ فِي الْقِلَّةِ. When we are in difficult situations, that's when we give sadaqah. Because for a believer, sadaqah is not extra. If we think of giving in the way of Allah as extra, then we will be most generous when we are wealthy. And then when we do not have enough, we become stingy. Sadaqah for a believer is a way of honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we are poor, when we are in difficulty, that is when we need Allah the most. That is when we will want to give sadaqah the most. It might be a smaller amount of money because we are not rich. Or our sadaqah may be in the form of a dua. Or our sadaqah may be in the form of our time if we do not have money. But we will give sadaqah when we have qillah, when we are in difficult financial situations, not just when we are wealthy, because we think of sadaqah not as the extra of my wealth, we think of sadaqah as the way to come close to God. So first is to have piety when we are alone. Second is to give sadaqah even when we are in difficulty. وَالصَّبْرُ عِنْدَ الْمُصِيبَةِ. When we suffer, that is when we have patience and forbearance, because we know that Allah is with us. We are never alone. And when Allah is with you, then you have no reason to lose heart. وَالْحِلْمُ عِنْدَ الْغَضَبِ. Our fourth Imam says that when you are angry, that is when you have control of your tongue, control of your actions. Don't lash out, but rather speak with discipline and what is worthy of a believer. And finally, the Imam says, وَالصِّدْقُ عِنْدَ الْخَوْفِ. When you are fearful, that is when you are true. Don't forget your principles and your values because you are afraid. Don't tell a lie because you don't want somebody to get angry with you or be disappointed with you. وَالصِّدْقُ عِنْدَ الْخَوْفِ. When you are afraid of a negative reaction, that is when you are true to your principles and your values. These are the signs of a believer. Internal signs and external signs. And the signs of a believer, they will witness themselves in every moment of our life. That wherever we may be, whatever circumstances we may be in, our heart will be with Allah and with the chosen ones of Allah. On the day of Arba'een, we remember in particular one of those who visited Imam Hussein because his love for Karbala brought him to Imam Hussein. This was a companion of the Prophet, Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. According to some narrations, he was the first visitor to Karbala at a time when there was no shrine, when there was no beautiful dome, when there was no building, but it was just desert. And the signs of the battle that took place were still visible. And yet Jabir came to that desolate desert, which had been the scene of such a tragic battle. According to some narrations, Jabir was blind. And so he had one of his students, his servant Atiyah, with him. And as they approached Karbala, it was Atiyah who guided Jabir that this is the direction that we are going to go. Here is the Euphrates, where Jabir went, and he performed ghusl and did wudu, and then remembered the thirst of Imam Hussein and Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. But then as they approached the place where the body of Imam Hussein lay buried, Jabir, although he was blind, he told Atiyah, Atiyah, I no longer need you to hold me by the hand. Because that person whose love guided my soul is now going to take me by the hand. I no longer need my physical eyes, but I am coming into the presence of my beloved. Oh, Atiyah, if my eyes can't see, I can smell the fragrance of Hussein, and his fragrance is going to bring me to his presence. Jabir came, and as he came closer to the presence of Imam Hussein, it was as if he was being taken back to the battlefield. He started walking, but then his steps slowed, and he began to come much more slowly, one step in front of another, until his grief overtook him, tears streaming down his face. Jabir now was on his knees, gradually coming forward, inch by inch, until he reached a spot where there was no tombstone, no outward marking, but his heart told him, his soul told him that this was the very spot where Imam Hussein was buried. Jabir threw himself on the grave. He said, "Oh Hussein, we have been separated for so long. Oh my beloved Imam, it pains my heart that I was not able to be present when you called for help, and I was not able to give my life in defense of your path. According to narrations by the wisdom of Allah, that is when the captives of Karbala also came. And as Jabir was saying these words of devotion to Imam Hussein, he saw in the distance, or he heard from Atiyah that in the distance there was some sand that had been shaken up and people were approaching. Jabir said that it seems as if I am not the only one who is going to perform ziyarah of Imam Hussein on this day of Arba'een. After a short time, the family of the Prophet came. Imam Zainul Abidin, his hands were no longer bound by chains, but the wound was still present. There was no chain around his neck, no rope binding his feet, but all of those grievous wounds were still present on the body of Imam Zainul Abidin and on the bodies of the women and the children, the captives from the family of the Prophet who came to Karbala. As they approached Imam Zainul Abidin, he said salam to Jabir, and then he said, "Oh Jabir, would you like to know how it is that this grave came to be? After the battle of Karbala, the final tragedy was not that my father, the grandson of the Prophet, was martyred, but after his martyrdom, Ibn Sa'd gave the command that the head of my father was going to be separated from its body. I saw the body of my father trampled under the hooves of horses. I saw the body of my father raised on a spear. I saw that my father's body lay on the sands of Karbala, unburied. We were made captives and we were taken to Kufa and then onwards to Damascus. But Allah has decreed that the burial of an Imam will only take place at the hands of an Imam. Oh Jabir, I came back after Karbala, just 2 days after the battle, and I was in the land of Karbala. Once again I lived that tragedy because I had with my own hands to bury the body of my father and to lift the small body of my 6-month-old brother al-Asr and place his body on the chest of Imam Hussein. Oh Jabir, let me show you where the grave of Ali Akbar is. Let me show you where Qasim and Aun and Muhammad were buried. Jabir, let me take you back to the Euphrates and I will tell you, this is where the right hand of my uncle Abbas fell. This is where the left hand of my uncle Abbas fell to the ground. This is where the water skin was pierced. This is where Abbas was martyred. Jabir, you cannot imagine what I witnessed on the day of Ashura. Jabir, you cannot imagine how I buried the martyrs of Karbala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. معتم حسين.
Zainab had said, "Oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness." Zainab had said, "Oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. Layla Sanani Akbar, who looked like my grandfather. Layla saw his dead body. What has happened to my house? Zainab had said, oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. The guardian of my bed, Abbas, went out just to fetch water. He had lost his arms and died. What has happened to my house? Zainab had said, oh people,
What has happened to my house?
yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. Farwa's son Qasim went into the war and fell. He saw his mother in pieces. What has happened to my house? Zainab had said, oh people, to my house. Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. Rubab Sanani Asghar, who couldn't sleep in his cradle. He slept on the burning sand. What has happened to my house? Zainab had said, oh people,
What has
happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. My brother Imam Hassan, for whom I sacrificed my son, I saw Shimmer slaughter him. What has happened to my house? Zainab has said, oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. Imam Zainul Abidin, who was ill and unconscious, he saw his father's head on a spear. What has happened to my house? Zainab had said, oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. When night fell on Ashura, all the children were frightened. Our tents were all burned up. What has happened to my house? Zainab had said, oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. We were taken as prisoners to Kufa in the court of Sham. We didn't even have our bells. What has happened to my house? Zainab had said, oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. Oh, Hussein, your daughter, who couldn't sleep without your chest. She had went to sleep in Sham. What has happened to my house? Zainab had said, oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness. Oh, my brother, I'll come to you. I'll perform your arba'in. Sakina will not be there. What has happened to my house? Zainab has said, oh people, what has happened to my house? Yesterday it was so full. Now there's only emptiness.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. Time for speech had come and gone. The cost of peace would be the truth. It is a price we cannot pay. It isn't ours to give away. This final night we will rest, we will pray with every breath. For in the day the sun will rise and shine its rays upon our death. For in the day the sun will rise and shine its rays upon our death. May the night never end, the sun never rise. May the light of Hussein never fade from our lives. May the night never end, the sun never rise. May the light of Hussein never fade from our lives. What the darkness had concealed, the sunlight would soon reveal. Hateful lies and sharp weapons turned against the best of men. Evil words and wicked lies turn virtue into a sin, to make the grandson of Nabi look like his people's enemy. To make the grandson of Nabi look like his people's enemy. May the night never end, the sun never rise. May the light of Hussein never fade from our lives. May the night never end. He gave us every chance to leave in the darkness of the night. He turned the candles off to hide the shame of those who left in fright. Candles relit only to reveal not a one had left his place. How could we ever leave Hussein and live with such disgrace? How could we ever leave Hussein and live with such disgrace? May the night never end. May the light of Hussein never fade from our lives. May the night never end. The Martyrdom was on our minds, it was the object of our prayer. That night our goal was in our sight, happiness had filled the air. But in the day we cried such tears, all the joy was gone. For we'd leave our master all alone when we died under the sun. For we'd leave our master all alone when we died under the sun. May the night never end. May the light of Hussein never fade from our lives. May the night never end. Though the sun was in the sky, darkness spread across the land. They took our very source of light and trampled him into the sand. They put his head upon a spear, his family left alone in tears to keep their guiding light still near. Our grief will last throughout the years to keep his guiding light still near. Our grief will last throughout the years. May the night never end. May the night never end, may the sun never rise, may the light of Hussein يا حجة ابن الحسن عجل على ظهورك 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 صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام وإليك يعود السلام سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام على الحسن والحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين صلوات